It's hard to say because I met my husband only a year before my diagnosis and about 6 months before the first symptoms. He was, of course, then only my boyfriend, my long-distance boyfriend, even more so, which makes it difficult to really know what things would have been like for us without Crohn's. I was 9 when I first looked at Mars through a telescope. It was my grandfather's telescope. He passed away a couple of months soon thereafter. But he showed me Mars, Saturn, Jupiter through his telescope, and I loved it. I found it fascinating that there was another planet, much like ours, hanging in the night sky. I wanted to know more. I could not be stopped. I just wanted to know more and more. I started reading books. I collected newspaper clippings about anything related to space and particularly to Mars. I met this Italian man about 8 years ago while I was on holiday, and 5 years later married him. And well, I'm originally from South Africa, but my whole family still lives there. My parents and both sisters, both married. But my new life is in Italy now, at least for the time being. Earlier on, I had already made up my mind that I wanted to do something with Mars. So I had a geology background because I find volcanoes and dinosaurs fascinating. And then I decided to use that as a stepping stone to my master's in planetary science, which was done in the States for 2 years. I lived in Alabama, about 90 minutes outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And then from there on, I decided to also follow it up with a PhD for 4 years at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands. And I'm actually still completing the last few articles. We need to have 4 or 5 manuscripts submitted or at least accepted to some point. Accepted or at least submitted before we can have the degree. So that's where I'm at right now. Back in 2003, I had woken up one morning with a strange tingling in my feet, worse than just the pins and needles, to the extent that I could not walk down the stairs. It was burning like flames by the time I made the decision to seek help. My father, I remember, carried me to the ER, I guess is how you would translate it, the emergency room. And they were very shocked about a high inflammation count, could not understand why, gave me a huge amount of cortisone to get me to calm down, to get the body's inflammatory responses to calm down. And since it worked so well, 3 days later I was released and nobody understood what happened, what it was, why. Life just continued as normal from then on. It wasn't until 2006 where I realized that there may have been a connection, at least on the level of the immune system, that something was not running smoothly. I had just moved to Alabama, to Auburn, where I was starting my master's degree in geology, and I had the first signs of Crohn's disease. Severe constipation, a lot of abdominal pain, and significant blood loss from time to time. I had gone into having extremely dark, bloody stools, much more diarrhea, white sores covering the inside of my mouth, sometimes as many that I've counted as 20, making it extremely painful to eat. And once eating, it would be painful to digest and difficult to pass. So we went to the colonoscopy analysis, my first one ever, and it showed severe inflammation of the lower 20 centimeters of my large intestine or large colon. Our relationship started off, as I just mentioned, as a long-distance relationship. I met him in Italy while on holiday. It was a kiss. It was meant to be nothing more than that. But we liked each other. And he came to visit South Africa shortly after meeting me here in the summer of 2005. And we enjoyed each other's company. One of my very first memories of him visiting me in the States and having to deal with this new story in my life, and with this I mean my story with Crohn's, was that we were traveling from my host parents' home in Alabama, where I had stayed as an exchange student. We had known each other for 5 months, 6 months. I had to tell him to stop the car. I have to go. Here, on the side of the road, in the middle of the night, fortunately, it was dark, and you're gonna have to, deal with the fact that you're dating this girlfriend who's stopping on the side of the road and doing the unthinkable. In an early phase of a relationship, that could have made or broken the relationship. He stopped. We continued to drive to town, and he never mentioned it again. He lived as if it didn't happen, even though, of course, that was the first of hundreds of episodes, similar and even worse. I had, for June 2006, already scheduled a trip to go home to South Africa, mainly because it was my father's 50th birthday. And even though I was not in optimal condition for flying, I decided to do so. And the flight home was extremely terrible. I was exhausted, I couldn't eat, I was entirely dehydrated, and within 24 hours of arriving at home, I was in the ER, having fainted, most likely from low blood pressure and dehydration, and why my vital signs had gone completely haywire, extreme amount of blood loss, and weight loss that had gone with no eating for weeks, or little eating. And I ended up spending almost 2 weeks in the hospital. That was my first severe indication of the disease, and also my father's 50th birthday was spent in the ICU at that time, the intensive care unit, because I was not well at all. During this episode of June 2006, my hospitalization in South Africa, I was immediately given large doses of cortisone. I felt much better after the high doses of cortisone. That took care of a lot of the inflammation, took care of the mouth ulcers. I could eat and I felt stronger. And I went back in August 2006 to the US, full of ideas of how to try different diets and to find out what was making me sick, such as no meat, no lactose, no sugar, completely vegetarian for some point, completely vegan at another point. And the only thing that really ever resulted was weight loss, severe weight loss. By December, after having been home once more for Christmas, the doctors decided to let me start Remicade therapy in the US in January 2007. This was more or less 6 months after I was diagnosed. They called it pulling out the big guns, because I was not responding to any of the combinations of drugs other than staying on cortisone almost constantly. I was all right, as long as you consider painful stools and long, difficult days. I still had hope, though, that it was just a phase. Well, it turned out now, looking back, that it was only the beginning of a very long phase. That was the beginning of 5 to 6 years of intensive treatment with little results. We like to go out and see what the real world looks like before we try to understand what the photos of Mars look like. Keep in mind, nobody's ever been to Mars, and all we have of Mars are pictures of the surface. And for that, yes, we go to all different corners, like the Atacama Desert, the Sahara Desert, the Namib Desert, the Oman Desert, and all of those places I've been and done some very exciting fieldwork. And of course, well, whenever I'm traveling fieldwork, I've had to stay quite aware of my limitations, extra aware on what I eat, because small triggers can cause many other bigger things. Always traveling with extra medication, always traveling with antibiotics just in case, and cortisons. And yes, very frequently finding a large rock. Well, large trees don't exist in the deserts, right? So it's always a matter of finding a large enough rock and telling the rest to march on. But part of the game. By now, my field companions are used to it. When I finally moved to Europe and he also moved back, when we finally lived for the first time in the same country, in the Netherlands, we really got to know what everyday life is like together. He realized that I was just not up for all the parties and all the events. I wasn't up for all the things that normal people of 25 or 28 do. A small side note is that he proposed to me in my house, or in a normal situation, not the Eiffel Tower or some fancy restaurant, because, and these were his words, I want you to know that this is not for the highlights, but this is also for the lowlights. And I believe that our life was founded strongly on our communal struggle with my Crohn's. We got married in South Africa, and the whole Italian clan flew down, friends and family included. And the best man had gotten lost. Well, that happens, but he had the rings. So we couldn't proceed. Now, I was ready on time. I have a father who's very much on time. So he had me promise that I'm not gonna be late on my wedding day because he wouldn't have it. So I was ready at noon when the ceremony was meant to start, and I was outside in the car waiting for everybody to enter, but the best man still wasn't there, and neither were the rings, so the ceremony couldn't proceed. So we waited, and I was in the car. Unfortunately, despite the fact that I had, of course, taken the Imodium the morning before, it's an important day, I had to go, but I was in a big white wedding dress, very traditional, very big, lots of veil and all sorts, and I had to go, and the only person with me was my dad. He was driving the car, and he was the person. So, we had been circling the block already quite a few times. It was 20 minutes later already, and I said, well, we're gonna have to find a hotel, Daddy. I gotta go. So he found me a hotel nearby, a bed and breakfast sort of thing with a bathroom, and they were all really excited to have the bride come in and use the loo. And then I needed my dad to help me hold this dress. Well, at least we managed to laugh. My father has been so supportive throughout this, and that to me really describes his support. Of course, he doesn't want to be involved personally, up close when it comes to the actual bathroom, but if needs be, he's there. He carries me in his arms still to this day. I mean, I'm 20, now I'm 30 already. If things go wrong, he'll pick me up and take me to the hospital in his arms.
Mama kan het maar uithaal terwijl jullie naar mij kijken, niet? En dan zit nou het anders in die kamer.
My family has been really the key to my support. And my in-laws have been very good too, From their point of view, this is difficult. They don't know me that well, even though maybe we would like to know each other well. They want the best for their son. It's hard to have a sick daughter-in-law when you really want grandchildren. But they understand that it's not a choice, and they are living through this with us. They care a lot about me, and that helps in the difficult times. After our marriage, of course, there's the inevitable question of how did things go? It's not just, you don't only talk to your husband, you live with your husband. And yes, we had issues. Crohn's, especially in my case, is a physical impediment, especially in the area of the lower colon. That was an issue for us. That was an issue for us physically. That was an issue for us based on pain, based on all kinds of unexpected things that might happen during time that you're trying to be intimate and romantic. That, of course, influenced the relationship to some extent. And that brings with it, of course, in the few lucky cases, a deep sense of belonging. If you are able to go through those most mortifying experiences where you have issues while making love, and your husband still turns back to you and tells you, I love you, you know you have something that will probably last. He's told me numerous times when I'm only concerned about how I look or how I feel, he tells me he doesn't care about any of it, but he cares about the fact that he feels so useless. He can't fix it. So I know he's suffered, and I know that things probably would have been a whole lot happier for us if we didn't have Crohn's. But I hold on to the fact that I think our relationship is particularly strong because of the Crohn's. In 2012, I, early in January already, had been home for a visit in South Africa, and usually these were the highlights of my life, and yet I had a serious relapse or a flare-up, as you would call it. I went to the hospital with significantly high CRP counts and serious pain and, as always, weight loss, low blood pressure, and so on. I was treated with the highest amount of intravenous cortisone that I've ever had in my history. But the good news is, shortly thereafter, probably the high courses of antibiotics and prednisons, and also the first intravenous cortisones, made me feel a whole lot better. As always, my first weeks out of the hospital were usually very good weeks. And in this particular case, it turned out extremely good for us. My husband and I, who had at that time already been trying to have kids for a year and a half, 2 years, for the first time fell pregnant naturally. And that was very good news for us because, of course, being pregnant is already a big step, but being pregnant naturally when you are so sick and have been so sick for such a long period of time was a miracle. I felt very tired, but extremely excited. And strangely enough, my Crohn's symptoms got week by week less, even though my fatigue remained or got worse. But my Crohn's diarrhea and blood loss diminished. Unfortunately, the story did not end well. And at 8 weeks, we realized that between 10 days before, there hadn't been much growth. I took the decision not to immediately intervene. I wanted to wait and see what the body would do with this. Well, for all reasons, understandably, those of a mother, unless you've seen the loss, it's hard to believe it. But unfortunately, with my historically low blood numbers related to Crohn's, which still wasn't entirely dormant by then, I was advised by my IBD specialists not to wait. I had already waited up to 10 weeks, not to wait beyond the 10 weeks mark. So I eventually let myself be taken in for the procedure of a DNC, dilatation and curettage, which was, of course, devastating, but that's not really the end of it. The good news is it seems that at some point during 2012, I reached my first remission. And I look back to our successful natural pregnancy as a point of hope that in my life it is possible to naturally fall pregnant and that it may have been related to my significant change in terms of Crohn's disease. Six, 7, 8 years ago, I probably was a whole lot more carefree. I was a whole lot more ambitious, sad to say, but I also used to think you can do anything as long as you think you can. Life's not that simple, unfortunately. And I know your body can take only so much before you relapse. So I've become a lot more aware of what my limitations are. I've also become a lot better at choosing what to eat. I've noticed that there are other ways of eating healthy rather than just having takeaway pizzas all the time. I would forever be affected physically by the downtime that my body had for 6 years. I've also had during the time lots of ups and downs with the cortisone. My wedding photos are forever etched in stone with a round, puffy cortisone face. Wasn't anything I could do about that. If you ask me now, during a good time, it's easy to be positive about it. If you asked me 2 years ago during a bad time, you probably would have heard a much different story. It was very hard, or it has been, it may be again in future, I don't know, to cope with the effects. Call them the side effects, call them the direct symptoms. Those were difficult to live with. They really affected my life tremendously, and not just slightly. And I really have always wanted to, be a top researcher on Mars, go there, be the astronaut, win the prize, that sort of thing. Very competitive. But when I moved to Italy, I remember physically making the decision that says, I am here now for me. I'm going to choose the healthy life and the future and the family part of things. And with my dream of having a family, I think my dream of being the #1 Mars researcher is taking a backseat. During this time where my strength came back and my vitality came back and a lot of things that I had lost and almost didn't even realize you missed. Life changes so quickly. And we decided to try and see if we can go visit Everest Base Camp. I started running again. I ran with my father last August, my first 5 kilometers again in years. And that felt fantastic. I ran also in Milan. I recently completed my first 10 kilometers in more than 10 years in an hour also, which I felt extremely proud of, which to a real runner doesn't mean that much. To someone who's walked the road I've walked, it was a fantastic celebration. And I believe that our road to Everest is part of that. But on a much deeper level, coming to terms with your disease, be it in whichever way it still is active. Because of course, Crohn's is only dormant in my life, not fully eradicated yet, if ever. I want to celebrate my own personal road, keeping in mind also the low points, and knowing that it's not only about being healthy, it's about being okay. That's what Everest is about.